some shopping, and expected home. And things would get a bit awkward if they didn't arrive home in the next sort of 45 minutes or so. And of course, this is before cell phones or anything like that. So I managed to negotiate a police car to accommodate them, and convincing the crew of the police car who I had in this broken down vehicle was a bit of a job as well. But eventually they got home, and I had a very nice call the next day from one of the protection officers saying, obviously nothing can go on paper, but Your Royal Highnesses are very happy. Thank you very much.
Well, there you go. So you actually carried on with some adventurous activity as Commandant of the Public Order Training Center. Tell us about that.
Well, in parallel with the sort of crisis and terrorism stuff, I got myself involved in public order, as we call it in the UK. It's the sort of, I think the more glamorous phrase for it is riot control and things like that. But public order is really what it's about. And I got involved from the first day, the first time we ever started doing training, and stayed with it throughout my early career, getting involved in a number of the sort of disorders and riots that occurred in London over the sort of intervening years. And that also included going to outside of London to help police the miners' strike that occurred in the early 1980s. So I started to understand that things were, whilst we were quite good from a tactical point of view, I felt that there was a gap between the signs of disorder starting to sort of ferment and the time that the police then deployed onto the streets to deal with it. And so I started to develop an interest in conflict management, and coincided with new posts being created at the Public Order Training Centre, where senior officers were to be trained in understanding the dynamics of conflict that led to rioting. So I took that on, and that became my area of speciality.
Right, and that fulfilled a next whole series of events in the future. But just one that I love mentioning or hearing about is, you did make reference to the miners' strike in the early 1980s. And as far as I recall, you were one of those people with the shields at the miners' strike that's portrayed in the movie and the show Billy Elliot, that helped grease the wheels of your interest in conflict management and negotiating. Is that true?
Well, yes, indeed, it was. In fact, I didn't know at the time of the development of the story of Billy Elliot. It was only, later on when I had the opportunity to read about it in the newspaper and then finally go to see it. I realised what it was all about, and it was a very traumatic time for the United Kingdom. And when I left London to go to Yorkshire on promotion, Yorkshire was one of the main areas that had been involved in the miners' strike. And there I was turning up 15 years later, and the tensions and the divisions within families and villages were still as raw as they were when we were trying to protect miners who chose to go to work. Yeah. So it was the legacy of that was huge, and it taught me a lesson about how there, in many cases, when one deals with conflict, the residual elements of whatever the initial flare-up was are often the things that maintain the conflict for many, many years. So part of my study was to, and I looked at it from a master's degree perspective, was to try and understand how conflict escalates, and then how we could actually dismantle those escalation points to stop things from deteriorating.
Yeah, fantastic. Now, as part of that time as a senior officer in Yorkshire, you also took on the role with the EU. So could you quickly describe that a little bit?
Yes. In the European Union, there's each time there is a new treaty, they create working groups that do effectively do the work for European Union legislation. And I represented the United Kingdom in the police cooperation group. And as a result of our presidency during my time, I authored a conflict management manual for the European Union police, which I know in some countries, certainly in some Scandinavian countries, is still being used. So that was quite a pleasure to be involved with, and it's also it prepared me for a sort of career in understanding how the dynamics in different countries work and how the situations that occur in the United Kingdom aren't always capable of being managed in the same way in other countries.
Mm. So then the last bit of your, even post-retirement, first, while you were still with South Yorkshire, you had time in Iraq as senior police advisor. Might be worth a quick mention of that. And then on to some of the consulting work you've been doing in post-conflict stabilization.
Well, you slipped in the word retirement, which is one that I don't allow in my vocabulary, because for me, it has all sorts of sedentary connotations. But yeah, I went from the British police to support the action in Iraq, and was the chief police advisor to the Coalition Provisional Authority. And as a result of that, and the exposure to international policing, I knew I was never going to come back to domestic policing. And so, having spent a year in Iraq and leaving shortly after the administrator left, when things were handed back to the Iraqis, I found myself leading a EU mission to Darfur in Sudan, which lasted for me for about 18 months. And then I found doing other work in Africa for the G8, led to then working in the West Bank, developing the leadership skills of the security forces there. And it's gone on from there, different countries, different places, different challenges, but fundamentally about reform.
Mm. Fantastic. Yeah. And you're now, we did introduce the fact that you are now an Oxford Don. So in the short time we have left, share with us about that a little bit, what you're working on.
Because Dons are people who are employed at Oxford, and I'm a doctoral research student. So, I'm researching for my doctorate the ability of the police in a particular part of Africa to reform themselves because of the demands of a new constitution, requiring them to be much more liberal, much more democratic, in a condition. They've only been independent for about 2 years, a condition that hasn't yet really fully formed itself. So some real challenges there, but the people that I worked with previously there have been very helpful, and hopefully my presence has had a little bit of value added to their perceptions of the future.
Thank you. And final comment, any advice for up-and-comers in their career choices or how to move through a career?
Well, I mean, I was very fortunate. The police was my career, but there were so many things I got the opportunity to do, so many different diverse things in the police. There was never a time where I felt unfulfilled. But what I would say is the other part, and I know how much of a clamour there is when people are at the young end of their career, is, adopt a sort of inquisitive mind that allows you to continuously learn. I'm at the wrong side of 60 these days, and I still find fascination in learning new stuff. So my message would be: don't try to cram it all in the latter part of high school or college, but allow yourself to learn things as you go along, and sometimes to get the qualifications that need to go with it.
Fantastic. Thank you. And if anyone wants to have access to Douglas, maybe bring him in to make some keynote speeches, you can find him at douglasbrandspeaking.com. Thank you, Douglas, for spending time with us today. This is Douglas Brand we've been with, and I want to thank our listeners as well for joining us on Living Legacy Leadership and the SOB Radio Network. Do check out GameChangerThinking.com as well to find more resources and check out opportunities for you to have your legacy strategy coaching as well. And with appreciation to Douglas Brand again, I want to remind you that the life you live is the legacy you leave. Thank you, and bye-bye now.